White cop laughed when a black teenager said his dad was in special forces. He stopped laughing when the man walked in, and the entire precinct went silent. The sun hung low over Oakage Heights, casting long shadows across perfect white fences and freshly trimmed hedges. At 4:07 p.m., Jallen King walked the same route he took every day from school to home, earbuds in, hoodie up, backpack slung low. 16 years old, tall for his age, quiet by nature. Moved like someone trained not to be noticed, a shadow in his own neighborhood. But in Oakage Heights, being a black teenager meant you were never just a kid going home. You were a question mark, a reason for suspicion, a problem waiting to be solved. The cruiser crawled beside him like a predator easing into range. Jallen didn't have to look to know, he felt it, that chill in the spine, that silent dread pressing against his ribs. The window rolled down slowly. "Hey, you. Hold up a second," he paused, took out one earbud, just one. His father had taught him that. Never make sudden moves, never both hands, never turn your back. Stay calm, stay visible. "Yes, sir." The man behind the wheel wore the badge like it was armor, but his eyes were all threat. Officer Bradley Grayson, new to the force but already known. His posture screamed military, his expression screamed suspicion. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" "I live here, sir." "Just walking home from school." Grayson's eyes raked over him head to toe, backpack, hoodie, skin. He opened his door and stepped out slowly. "ID? I'm 16, don't have a license, just my school ID, it's in my backpack. Let me see your hands." Jallen froze, slowly raised both hands in front of him. "It's in my bag, sir." The street went still. Somewhere behind the white blinds, Mrs. Whitaker paused her television and peeked through the curtains. 2 houses down. Someone's lawnmower went quiet. Jallen knelt slowly, unzipping his bag. Just books, calculator, basketball shoes, no threat, no crime. Grayson stepped closer, towering now. "What street?" "Cedar, number 1742, 3 blocks that way. Anyone home?" "My mom's at work. She'll be home soon." "And your dad?" Jallen hesitated. "He's away for work." Grayson smirked. What kind of work keeps a man away from his family? His tone shifted. Friendly now, but laced with insult. "Let me guess, you kids never have dads around, am I right?" Jallen said nothing. His jaw clenched. "My dad's in special forces." The words came quiet, not defiant, just truth. For a second there was silence. Then came the laughter. "Special forces? Your daddy's G.I. Joe?" Grayson stepped back, projecting now, loud enough for the whole street to hear. Another cruiser pulled up behind him. Officer Miller stepped out, unsure what was happening but already smiling. "Hey, Miller. This kid says his daddy's in the special forces. Maybe he works with Chuck Norris too." Miller chuckled awkwardly, didn't know where this was going but went along anyway. "That's how it worked here." Jallen stood still, said nothing. His face didn't move, but inside everything burned. Across the street, hidden half behind a wooden fence, Maya Thompson stood with her phone half raised. She wasn't friends with Jallen. Knew him only by name, same math class, but something about this made her stomach twist. She thought of her father, pulled over last year for failing to signal. Thought of his silence when he came home, shoulders heavy, words caught somewhere in his chest. A finger hovered over the record button, then she pressed. Grayson leaned in close again. "Listen, soldier boy, next time you make up stories, pick something believable. I was in the military, I know what real soldiers look like." Jallen's eyes didn't flinch. He didn't argue, didn't plead, just watched. "Get your stuff, move along, and stay out of trouble." Jallen packed slowly, deliberate, music still off in his ears but the words still ringing. He didn't look back, not once. That too his father had taught him. As Grayson turned to leave, something in him stirred. He didn't like the way that kid had looked at him, like he wasn't afraid, like he knew something. Grayson glanced at Miller. "You ever heard of a King family around here?" Miller shrugged. "Nah, but now I'm curious." Grayson nodded. "Let's find out who his daddy really is." Maya stopped recording, saved the file, didn't know why she felt shaken, but deep down she knew that video mattered. It meant something, not just for Jallen, for people like her father, for people like her. She didn't know it yet, but today would be the beginning of everything. The house on Cedar Street stood quiet behind drawn curtains. Inside, the walls told a carefully chosen story, family photos of beach trips, middle school graduations, backyard barbecues. Not a single frame hinted at military service. No medals, no flags, no uniforms. Everything about the King home said ordinary. By design, Jallen closed the front door behind him and dropped his backpack by the staircase. He didn't move for a while, just stood there in the entryway, letting the silence settle over him. The scent of lemon polish clung to the air, mixed with the faint echo of last night's spaghetti. It should have felt like safety, but something inside him was still clenched tight. He walked to the kitchen, grabbed an apple, took a bite. The crunch felt too loud in the stillness. The sound of keys turned in the lock. He didn't need to look to know it was his mother. Angela King stepped into the room with the quiet authority of someone who balanced a hospital floor by day and a home by night. Her blouse was neatly pressed, her heels already in one hand, her purse in the other. "Hey baby, how was school?" "Fine." Angela paused, looked up. Jallen was facing the sink, shoulders tight. She set her things down and watched him for a beat. "What happened?" It wasn't a question. He exhaled. "I got stopped on the way home by a cop, the new one, Grayson." Angela's posture shifted just slightly. Alert now, focused. "Did he say why?" "He said I looked out of place. Made me empty my bag, asked where I lived, who was home." "Did he touch you?" "No." "Did you stay calm?" "Yeah, like Dad taught me." Angela stepped closer. "What else?" Jallen hesitated. Took another bite of the apple to stall. Chewed slowly, swallowed hard. "He asked about Dad." Angela didn't blink, but her fingers curled slightly at her sides. "And I told him, I said he's in special forces." The silence that followed wasn't loud, it was surgical. Angela moved to the sink, filled a glass of water, set it down without drinking. Then she turned to face her son. "We've talked about this. I know, you know why we don't talk about your father's work." I didn't give details. He was mocking me, saying Dad probably ran off, that kids like me never have a man at home, and so you gave him ammunition. He was wrong, Mom. Angela's voice dropped to a whisper. "Jallen, this isn't about pride, it's about safety. Yours, his, mine." Jallen looked down. "I didn't mean to break the rule. I didn't want him thinking Dad abandoned us." Angela stepped forward, pulled him into a hug. He didn't resist this time. That said enough. After a long moment, she pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "Listen to me. Your father's work is not a topic for conversation. Not with neighbors, not with friends, not with police, I understand. From now on, if anyone asks, he's a government contractor who travels, that's all." Jallen nodded. Angela checked her phone on the counter. A new message blinked across the screen from an unknown number. She opened it, read, froze. The message was simple. "Eyes open, close them before it's too late. No signature, no number traceable." Angela locked the screen, set the phone face down. Jallen caught the look. "What is it?" "Nothing, work." But he didn't believe her, not this time. Later that night, alone in his room, Jallen sat on the floor with a tangle of thoughts running through his head. He remembered a backyard afternoon years ago, 8 years old. His father crouched beside him, showing him how to tie knots he thought he'd never use. "Why do I need to know this, Dad? We don't go camping." Isaiah had smiled, not warm, not cold, just steady. "Some things you show the world, son. Others you keep to yourself. The invisible tools are often the ones that matter most." Back then, Jallen didn't understand. Tonight, it made too much sense. He reached into his drawer and pulled out the shoebox where he kept old photos. One, buried under layers, showed his father from behind, carrying him on his shoulders, both of them laughing. The angle hid Isaiah's face, like always. Jallen stared at it, then slowly slid it back into the box. Outside, the neighborhood was still. But inside the King house, one thing had changed. The rule had been broken, and someone somewhere had noticed. Monday morning came with the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful. At Oakage High, the hallways buzzed with whispers before first period even began. Not about football scores or weekend parties. Not this time. It was about Jallen King and the cop, and the story that spread like fire on dry grass. The story where a black kid said his dad was special forces, and the new officer laughed like that was the funniest thing he'd heard all week. By second period, the rumors had mutated. In homeroom, someone claimed Jallen's dad worked at a gas station off Route 8. Another said he left years ago and never came back. None of them spoke to Jallen directly, but their voices never dropped low enough to hide the words. He sat at his desk, silent, back straight, gaze forward. Listening, not reacting, like his father taught him. At lunch, the real show started. Tyler Wilson strutted across the cafeteria like he owned it. Same kid who wore fake chains and laughed too loud. He slid into a seat across from Jallen, who sat alone as always, sandwich in hand, eyes down. "Heard you told that new cop your dad's in special forces," Tyler said, grinning so everyone could hear. "That's wild, man. My dad says your old man works at Burger Force." Laughter bubbled up from the next table. Jallen didn't flinch. He took another bite, chewed slowly, swallowed. Tyler leaned in, encouraged. "Come on, bro, be real. Your dad dipped out, didn't he? Probably didn't even know your name." Jallen looked up. His voice, when it came, was calm, quiet, but it carried. "Funny how your father knows so much about mine at dinner." The cafeteria stilled, just for a beat. Tyler's smirk faded. He stood up fast, muttered something under his breath, and walked off, red creeping up his neck. Across the room, Maya Thompson watched everything. She didn't laugh, didn't speak, just watched. 10 minutes later, she approached. She sat across from Jallen without asking. He didn't look up. "Ignore them," she said. "Tyler's dad is that realtor who got caught posting racist stuff online last year. Jallen's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. You know a lot about people's dads. Mom works at the courthouse. I hear things. They sat in silence for a while. Then Maya cleared her throat. I saw what happened with the cop. He looked at her, still not speaking. I recorded it, not all of it, but enough. Jallen's eyes narrowed slightly. Why? Because it was wrong. She hesitated. And because my dad was pulled over once. No reason, just driving while black. They kept him outside for 30 minutes while my mom cried in the car. He didn't say a word about it. Ever, I guess I'm tired of pretending it doesn't happen. Jallen nodded, slowly. You posted it? Not yet. I will if you want, or I won't. He thought for a second. Keep it for now. She studied him. Was it true about your dad? Jallen paused. Could have lied, could have laughed it off. Yeah, it's true. Cool, Maya said, standing. Just wanted to know. That night she sat at her desk with the lights dimmed. The video clip was still on her phone. But her browser had 10 tabs open now. Military forums, archived news reports, deep Google threads that most people never bother clicking through. She typed in Isaiah King. Most of the results were irrelevant. Common name. Articles about pastors, middle school principals, a jazz musician in Baltimore. But one post, buried in a veterans discussion board, made her stop scrolling. It was a thread titled People You Served With But Can't Talk About. Someone had written only 3 words: King, Ghost, Silence. Further down, another user replied, if it's the King I remember, best let that one be. You don't poke shadows like that. Maya leaned back, eyes wide. She wasn't sure what she'd expected, but it wasn't this. Clicked on the user profile. Retired Marine, forum verified. She saved a screenshot. Then another post older came up in a different forum. Operation Silencer. Unit Leader King, mission redacted, everything redacted. Maya didn't know what it meant, but one thing was clear. Jallen hadn't lied. And whoever his father was, some people out there really didn't want anyone to find out. The neighborhood slept under a blanket of stillness. Oakage Heights at 2:14 a.m. was the kind of quiet that made dogs too tired to bark and porch lights forget to flicker. But Grayson was awake. More than that, he was alive. The kind of alive that came with obsession, with hunger, with the certainty that he was close to something big. He had parked 3 houses down from the King residence, his car lights off, his badge locked in the glove compartment. He wasn't here as a cop tonight. He was here as something else, something darker. He moved along the edge of the tree line, staying in the shadows between fences and hedges. He had studied the layout earlier in the week. The King's backyard was tidy, the grass short. The tools hung in even rows on a pegboard inside the shed. That shed was his target. He had tried official channels, had looked into Isaiah King's file only to hit redacted walls and classified warnings. The deeper he dug, the more he found nothing. And that, he told himself, was proof something was being hidden. The shed was locked, of course, but not well, a cheap padlock. He pulled a thin pick from his pocket, worked the mechanism with practiced movements. It clicked open too easily. The door creaked once, then silence. Inside, the smell of grass seed and oil, gardening gloves, coiled hoses. A rake leaned perfectly against the far wall. On the top shelf, behind a row of terracotta pots, he saw it. A box, metal. Scuffed, the kind of box that didn't belong in a garden shed. He reached up, brought it down slowly. It was heavier than he expected. A padlock dangled from its latch, but it wasn't fastened, just looped through, resting, waiting. That made him pause. He opened it. Inside, a stack of foreign currency. Euros, rupees, something Cyrillic he couldn't read. A notebook filled with what looked like code, short phrases, letter number combinations. But underneath it all, one photograph. Isaiah King, or at least someone who looked like him, dressed in desert camo, standing beside 3 men whose faces were shadowed by deliberate angles. No patches, no insignia, no unit markings, just eyes, all of them staring at the camera like they knew exactly who would one day be holding it. Grayson's fingers tightened around the photo. He pulled out his phone, snapped quick shots. Each item, the box, the notebook, the photo. He replaced everything exactly as he'd found it, closed the lid, set the padlock back in place. Then he turned, unaware that in the corner of the shed above the door, a lens blinked silently to life. 1 block away, in a dark room above a bakery, a screen lit up. A silent feed streamed. Night vision. Grayson's every move outlined in gray and green. Across the room, a figure watched without expression. No words, just one tap on a keyboard. A still image saved. Time-stamped, labeled. Grayson stepped back into the night, unaware he'd been watched. He drove straight to his apartment, adrenaline burning through fatigue. He uploaded the photos, enlarged the image of Isaiah's face, cropped it, zoomed in. Those eyes, cold, focused. The eyes of a man who knew more than he said, who'd done more than anyone wanted to admit. He ran another search. Civilian records, military databases. But Isaiah King's employment history was vague. No active deployments, no rank listed. His service record, when accessed, responded with a flashing red alert, classified level 6, clearance required. Grayson stared at the screen. What kind of man required level 6 clearance just to confirm he existed? He didn't sleep that night. By morning, the sun rose slow and golden over Oakage Heights. Angela King was already awake, standing in the kitchen with a steaming mug when her phone vibrated. Unknown number. One image, Grayson in her shed. At 2:16 a.m. she didn't scream, she didn't cry. She opened a drawer, pulled out a small black device, tapped 3 buttons and waited. 1 hour later, she walked into the police station with a thumb drive and a folder. "I'd like to file a complaint." Officer Jenkins blinked at the footage, at the timestamp, at the unmistakable face of one of their own. "Ma'am, I need to get the sergeant." "Good, get him." Sergeant Wallace arrived. Watched the video in silence. Listened as Angela detailed not only the break-in, but the days of quiet harassment, the questioning, the surveillance. "This man came onto my property without a warrant, without cause. He's asking about my husband to neighbors, to our son. Now he's breaking into locked sheds at night." Wallace nodded slowly. "You'll get a full report, and a case number, and he'll be removed from duty pending investigation." Angela didn't say thank you. She just walked out, quiet, steady. By mid-afternoon, Grayson was called in, told to turn in his badge and sidearm. Suspended, he nodded, said nothing. But inside, the burn grew, not from guilt, from humiliation. He had seen a photograph. He had seen the eyes. He didn't know it yet, but that box wasn't left unlocked by accident. It had been waiting for him, because Isaiah King had already come home. And someone somewhere was watching Grayson now. Just like he'd been watching, only better, only smarter. And in the world Isaiah lived in, watching was never just watching. It was the first step in ending you, quietly, completely. The basketball court behind Oakage High was cracked at the edges, chain-link fence rattling softly in the wind. Late afternoon sunlight stretched long shadows across the concrete. Sneakers squeaked. A ball thudded off the rim. Laughter rose and fell like music. Jallen was mid-play when the cruisers rolled in. 2 black and whites, no sirens, just presence, intent, authority that didn't need to be loud. The first door opened. Officer Grayson stepped out. He wasn't in uniform. Just tactical black, belt heavy with equipment, eyes scanning. "That one," he said, pointing toward the court. "King, let's go." The other officers hesitated. A few students stopped playing. Jallen caught the movement, froze mid-dribble. "What for, sir?" Grayson stepped onto the court like it was his own territory. He didn't answer right away, just kept walking. Disturbance was reported. "You match the description. I've been here since school let out. We got a witness." "Which one?" "All my witnesses are right here." Grayson's hand rested casually near his belt. Not on his weapon, not yet, but close enough. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Jallen didn't move. The court had gone quiet. Every head turned. Maya stood near the fence, phone raised, already live. Grayson's voice sharpened. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Jallen glanced around. His friends, teammates, strangers, all watching. He turned, slowly. Extended his arms behind him. The cuffs clicked shut. Gasps, phones lifted. One boy shouted he didn't do anything. Another yelled, "We've all been here." Grayson ignored them, guided Jallen toward the cruiser. Maya's voice came low, steady into her phone. "This is Oakage Heights High School. A suspended officer is arresting a student without charge." Again, inside the cruiser, Jallen sat straight, silent, the metal cold on his wrists. His father's voice in his head. "Control the room without raising your voice. Own the moment without asking permission." He didn't flinch. At the station, things moved slower. Grayson walked Jallen through the back entrance. No booking, no charges read, just silence in a holding room. Sergeant Wallace was in his office when Angela King arrived. "Where's my son?" Wallace stood. "Ma'am, I understand you're where is my son?" Wallace hesitated. "He's in a room. We're sorting out." "You let Grayson near him again." "It wasn't authorized." "Then stop it." In the back, Grayson leaned against the wall, smirk playing at his lips. "Comfortable?" he asked. Jallen didn't answer. "You think this is over? You think your daddy's gonna flash another badge and make it all disappear?" Still no reply. Grayson stepped closer. "Where is he anyway? Overseas? Underground? Or maybe he just doesn't care." The door opened behind them. Grayson turned, still talking. "Unless your ghost dad wants to," he stopped. Isaiah King stood in the doorway. Jeans, boots, gray shirt, no announcement, no expression, but the air changed. Grayson's words died in his throat. Isaiah crossed the room without hurry, every step exact, controlled. He didn't look at Grayson, not yet. He placed a folder on the table in front of Jallen. "You all right?" Jallen nodded once. Isaiah turned, faced the officer. "Officer Grayson, I believe you've met my son." Grayson stared, caught between defiance and fear. "You don't scare me," he said. Isaiah smiled, just slightly. "Good. Then this won't be complicated." He reached into his back pocket, produced a government ID, red border, embedded seal, high clearance, not local. Sergeant Wallace entered just in time to see it. He froze. "Mr. King." Isaiah nodded, quiet, steady. "This officer has made a series of choices. I believe you've begun documentation." "Yes, we have." Isaiah tapped the folder on the table. "You'll find timestamps, security footage, witness statements, internal memos. I'm not here to threaten anyone." He turned fully toward Wallace. "I'm here to end this." Wallace didn't speak for a moment. Then quietly understood. Grayson's fists curled at his sides. "You can't just walk in here like—" Wallace raised a hand. "Enough, you're suspended, indefinitely. Leave your badge and leave this room." Grayson's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Isaiah, at Jallen, at the folder. He walked out without another word. Isaiah watched him go, then placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Let's go home." They left the room together. Angela was waiting in the lobby. The three of them stepped into the late evening light like they'd rehearsed it. No words, no dramatics, just presence, just power. And somewhere inside the station, Chief Williams watched them on the monitor feed. He turned to his deputy and said softly, "That man isn't from here, but I think some of the people we report to him." The message came just after 11:00 a.m. A simple text from Maya's number. "Need to talk. Emergency. Meet at Crawford Park Trail. Don't tell your parents." Jallen stared at it for a long moment. Something felt wrong. Maya didn't speak like that. And she definitely didn't send cryptic messages telling people to lie to their parents. Still, curiosity clawed at him. He slipped on his jacket, grabbed his phone, and walked out the door. Crawford Park Trail sat on the edge of town, quiet, mostly forgotten. The trees grew thick there, hiding old picnic tables and unused maintenance sheds. He walked the path slowly, eyes scanning. No Maya, just silence and wind. Then a voice. "Hey." Grayson stepped out from behind a tree, civilian clothes, gloves on, a pistol at his hip. Before Jallen could move, he felt the sharp jab of a taser in his side. His knees buckled, the world tilted, and then black. When he came to, the air was damp, the floor cold, cement. His hands were zip-tied behind his back, ankles bound. A single light buzzed overhead. The walls were steel and echo, a warehouse, abandoned, forgotten. But Grayson hadn't forgotten anything. Jallen blinked against the sting in his eyes. Grayson sat on a crate across from him, camera tripod set just a few feet away. A red light blinked. "You awake?" "Good." Grayson leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "This doesn't have to be complicated. Just tell the truth. Who is your father really? Who's he working for?" Jallen said nothing, breathing slow, eyes steady. Grayson stood, began pacing. "I've been watching your house. Watching your mother, your movements, the routines, that watch you wear, real nice. Military grade, too nice for a high school sophomore. You know what I think?" He turned. "I think your dad's been using this town as cover. I think he's running ops right here in Oak Ridge Heights, and I think you're going to tell me everything you know." Still, Jallen stayed silent, watching, measuring. His father had once told him, "If you're ever restrained, don't panic. Panic burns energy. What you need is control. Observe every word, every object, every habit of the man in front of you, a nervous blink, a weak wrist, a limp he's trying to hide. Weakness always reveals itself if you let it talk long enough." Grayson stepped forward, pulled out his phone, showed Jallen the photo from the shed, the one of Isaiah in desert camo with the shadowed men. "This guy, this is who you're protecting?" He knelt. "You think he's a hero? He's not. He's a ghost, a weapon. And weapons don't care who they hurt. I'm doing this to protect you." Jallen raised his eyes. "You're doing this to protect your pride." Grayson's jaw clenched. He stood quickly, kicked the crate across the floor. "Where is he?" Jallen smiled slightly. "Close. 2 miles away." Isaiah King crouched on the roof of a neighboring warehouse. Black boots, black coat, wind whispering through cracked skylights. In his ear, comms linked to 3 frequencies, one for SWAT, one for Federal Liaison, one for backup he hoped he wouldn't need. He wasn't alone, but he would enter alone. He watched the thermal feed from a drone above, 2 bodies inside, one seated, restrained, the other moving, pacing, agitated. He tapped the screen on his wrist console, activated pulse trace on Jallen's watch. Locked in. He dropped silently onto the rear fire escape, moved along the wall, counting windows, noting shadow lines, every step measured, every breath accounted for. Inside, Grayson now paced like a man unraveling. "You know what I'm risking by being here? They'll come for me, but not before I get the truth out." He adjusted the camera. "You're gonna say it, on record. Say who your dad really is. Say what he's hiding." "No," Grayson snapped, pulled the gun, pressed it to Jallen's temple. "Say it." Jallen didn't blink, didn't flinch. If you hear footsteps but don't see anyone, his father once told him, that's me coming for you. Right now, Jallen could swear he heard them. Grayson stepped back, aimed the camera, start talking. A soft voice came from the shadows. That's enough, Bradley. Grayson spun, gun raised. Who's there? Isaiah stepped into the light. Empty hands, calm eyes, not a threat. Not a victim, just a father. Let the boy go, he said. Grayson's hands shook. You followed me? No, I followed the mistake you made, kidnapping a minor, armed while suspended, broadcasting yourself into federal jurisdiction. You think I needed a tracker to find you? Grayson fired. The bullet missed. Isaiah moved before the second shot, closed the distance with 2 steps, disarmed Grayson with a flick of the wrist and a heel to the shoulder joint. The gun hit the ground. Jallen ducked. Grayson swung wildly, but Isaiah flowed around him like water, a strike to the neck, elbow to the ribs, a knee to the thigh. Grayson collapsed, gasping, disarmed, defeated. Isaiah didn't gloat, didn't speak. He picked up the zip ties, cut them with a blade from his boot. You all right? Jallen nodded, bruised, not broken. Outside, tires screeched. SWAT moved in. Federal agents followed, guns lowered, hands up. Too late for action. Just in time for evidence. Isaiah stepped back as they took Grayson into custody. One agent approached. We had eyes the whole time. Why didn't you wait? Isaiah looked at his son. Because some things you finish yourself. As Grayson was dragged out, still muttering about conspiracies, Jallen sat against the wall, catching his breath. His father joined him, sat down, no rush. You remembered? Jallen nodded. The steps. The timing, the voice. Isaiah smiled, small and proud. That's my boy. Outside, the sirens faded. The cameras rolled, the news spread. But inside that warehouse for a few minutes more, there was only silence. The kind that comes when shadows retreat, and the light finally steps in. 3 weeks later, Oakage Heights looked the same. Same white fences, same trimmed lawns, but something under the surface had shifted. You could feel it in how people paused a little longer before speaking, in how eyes met and didn't immediately look away. The town hall was packed that evening, every seat filled. People stood shoulder to shoulder in the aisles, in doorways, spilling out into the hallway. They weren't there out of obligation. They came because something had been broken, and for the first time maybe, they wanted to know how to fix it. Mayor Davis stood at the podium, trying to calm the room. Her voice was firm but too small for the tension in the air. Then someone whispered, he's here, and the whole place went still. Isaiah King stepped forward, not in uniform, not with a title, just in a dark button-down and slacks, the way a man dresses when he doesn't need to prove anything. He moved without hurry. His presence didn't demand attention, it drew it naturally like gravity. He looked out over the crowd. Parents, teachers, officers, kids from the high school, and just for a second his eyes found Jallen's, then Maya's, then the podium. Thank you, he said. His voice didn't need a microphone, but it had one anyway. What happened to my family was not unique. It was just seen, and once something is seen, it cannot be unseen. He paused, not to let the words settle, but to give space for reflection. I'm not here to assign blame. I'm not here for retribution. I'm here because a community is only as strong as its ability to face itself, and we need to face what we've allowed to happen in the quiet. He spoke of justice, not as punishment, but as presence, as accountability. He didn't speak of Grayson, not once, but everyone in the room could feel the weight of his absence. Isaiah spoke of his son, of the young people watching. He said that dignity is not granted. It's taught, modeled, passed down, and too often it is denied in silence. That must change. When he stepped away from the podium, the room didn't erupt in applause, not right away. The silence stretched, reverent. Then came the sound. Not thunderous, not performative, but real. Later in the crowd, a local journalist pulled Maya aside, asked her how it felt. Maya shrugged, said she didn't think about what she was doing that day, just hit record. The journalist smiled. Well, it got you something. He handed her a printed email. She read it twice. Full scholarship. National Journalism Program. Her hands trembled slightly, not because she didn't believe she deserved it, but because she knew what it had cost to get there. Outside the building, people gathered in clusters, talking, not arguing, sharing, whispering questions they hadn't dared to say before. At the edge of the lawn, Mrs. Whittaker stood beside Angela King, holding a plate of lemon cookies, hands shaking slightly. She apologized, quietly. Angela accepted. Grace exchanged for fear. That weekend, the sign went up outside the old recreation center. The King Institute for Leadership and Discipline. Isaiah didn't call it a dojo or a school. It was a space for any kid who needed to learn how to stand tall without striking first. Parents who once crossed the street when Jallen passed now signed their children up for his father's classes. Not all of them, but enough. One morning, as Isaiah swept the entrance, an old man approached. Worn coat, Vietnam pin on the collar. He said nothing at first, just handed Isaiah a wrapped newspaper, yellowed, fragile, dated 1968. The headline read, "Local youth accepted into military academy, first African-American cadet." Below it, a black and white photo. The old man pointed to the boy in the photo. "That was my brother, never made it back, but you remind me of him." Isaiah didn't speak, just nodded, and accepted the paper with both hands. That night at home, Jallen sat at the dinner table, books open, headphones around his neck. He looked older, not because of time, because of what he'd carried. Angela set down a plate. Isaiah sipped tea, flipping through security footage from the gym install. Then his private phone buzzed. A message, no name, no number, just 7 words, "If needed, we are still watching." Isaiah read it, then deleted it. Angela caught the flicker in his expression. "Everything okay?" "Yes," but she knew better. "He's still active," she said. Isaiah nodded. Sometimes the only way to stay in the light is to know where the shadows lie. They finished dinner in silence. Outside, the street was quiet, peaceful. Kids rode bikes, sprinklers hissed. Somewhere a dog barked. And behind a second-story window, Jallen looked out at the town, at the people, a place that had once rejected him, and now slowly began to listen. In the distance, a car idled, engine running, lights off, watching, not to threaten, but to protect. Because even ghosts have homes, and this one was his. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.